And welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. And we're getting into our discussion now with Raila Odinga, who is a legal consultant, and Sam Mwaura, who is a former KEPSA CEO. And you're both welcome to the program. You're speaking to us, of course, against the backdrop of a heated political period and now just some 2 days to the election. And Raila, let me begin with you. Official campaigns ended today. What do you think about the tone that has characterized this campaign period for the repeat presidential election?
Thank you, Anne, and thank you for inviting me to the program. The tone of the political campaigns. It's been a very, very heated scenario. It's been a very, very tense, vicious scenario. And I think very, very unfortunate thinking about it. I come from a gender background, and I speak for the women and children and families of this country when I think about the election campaign period. And women and families have borne the brunt of all this. When you look at it, when you see children shot in the neck, they have nothing to do with the elections. And that's really, really unfortunate. And it's because of what the politicians are dictating to us. When you go to a rally and tear gas is thrown out or they're being thrown out, our businesses are affected as women and children. If I'm selling skuma wiki on the roadside or oranges on the roadside, I can't do that. And all this tension has been brought out, and it's been a very emotive period, and very unfortunately so. And I don't know what we're going to do this, but it's been a very, very sad scenario. Lots of tear gas, lots of deaths, lots of sadness, and it's been out there.
Sam, where do you believe the country stands from a socio-economic perspective going into this election? Obviously, we've heard from business the revision, the losses that they're making, I think in the region of 900,000 shillings, we're told, daily for an average business. We've seen the revision of economic growth. But beyond that, where the two collide, our socio and economic status, where are we?
Now, sustainable economic development, first of all, is based on sound social development. And therefore, we really must understand that there is no dichotomy between social and economic. One needs the other. And what I would consider to be social is the bottom end of business. The juakali, the mamamboga, the hawkers, and the people who really struggle to eke a living. And they are the ones who have been the most affected because when there's an economic downturn and when business is interrupted, the large companies might drop from making hundreds of millions to making tens of millions.
But they're still making millions.
They're still making money. But the mama mboga drops from the minimum that she makes in a day to be able to survive to not being able to put a meal on the table. She's not able to eat. And that is the extreme
end of the
level to which we have actually driven our people. And this is not always appreciated. It is the poor of the poor who are most affected by the political instabilities such as we have in the country.
Raila, you're a lawyer. Legally, where do we stand? There have been a record number of cases that have gone to the courts throughout this election cycle. And when we speak to lawyers, it seems week from week, as much as you change the lawyer, so too does then the Constitution and its interpretation seem, to evolve. Where do we stand going into this process in 2 days? Is it what the law envisages in its entirety?
A very interesting question. We've seen a record number of cases filed in court. Today, I think we had like 6 or 7 cases trying to determine what is a fresh election. And you'd think in law terms that's a very, very simple question to answer. But when you go to the Constitution and you look at Articles 138, Article 139, Article 140, the answer is not there. You go to the Elections Act, the answer is not there. And you start asking yourself, where did we go wrong? Why didn't we answer these questions when we were drafting? But again, we must remember as Kenyans that when we were drafting the Constitution, we agreed 70% was good. It wasn't all good. There was something we're going to have to work on. So I think as we test the Constitution, we start finding the gaps, and we find that there are things we need to address. Issues of whether if you contest an election result, can you refuse to participate in the next election? Those are questions that are coming up and they're being asked. Is it an issue of contempt if you refuse to participate? Those are issues that are coming up. Can you withdraw outside the 7-day period that is envisaged at the beginning of the election presidential campaign before the petition? Right. Can we withdraw now? Those are all questions, legal questions coming up, legal questions with legal gaps in the law as they exist today. Are there any that, any of the cases that you see whose outcome may affect the election in 2 days? Totally. If they ruled that a fresh election needed fresh nominations, we're in big trouble. Because then it means that what we're doing all the way up to now can't work. We'd have to have gone back to a fresh nomination. But then, again, we could fall back to the Supreme Court decision, the 2013 decision, where the AG actually filed as part of his questions to the court for interpretation is what is a fresh election. So we could fall back to that interpretation. But again, if the High Court ruled otherwise, we'd be in big trouble. Right. But then again, not big trouble enough, because I look at it this way. I look at it like Article 142 of the Constitution is very clear, that the president sits in place until the next president is elected. So I don't see a crisis, I don't see a lacuna. I see it like, yes, if they ruled that, we'd just have to extend the period, and that means we'd have to go to court. IEBC has to be ready to go to court and say, look, in the circumstances, we can't hold the election tomorrow, but we need time. And the president has to sit in and continue to sit in. I don't see in the Constitution a place where we talk about a caretaker government. It doesn't arise, because the president sits until another president is elected. So the legal issues are there. We have legal issues to discuss, but it's not bad. It's growth. That's how we develop our jurisprudence. That's how we develop our laws. All right. And I think it's going to develop in that regard. Okay, so a key case to look out for in terms of how the High Court rules in the determination of what a fresh election is. President Kenyatta met with IEBC Chair Wafula Chebukati today. The outcome of that meeting was IEBC's confidence that they will launch this election, I should say, countrywide, and because they've been assured of their security, and they will be holding, of course, the right that the law allows them to suspend an election in an area where there is significant disturbance. So what do you think of IEBC's determination, despite all the clamor that there has been, particularly from the opposition, to wait until a more suitable environment presents itself, and they say they'll still go ahead with this poll?
We in business feel that the IEBC is doing the right thing. The IEBC were instructed to hold the election within 60 days, and to do so within the Constitution and the appropriate laws. It is extremely important for us to understand that unless we remain faithful to the Constitution, that between ethnic groups to come to the fore in the biggest force possible to try and claim this now uncharted territory. And that is recipe for chaos. The country will break up so fast and to such an extent that it will take us very many years to put it back together. So you feel IEBC is moving the right direction. Rosalind, even today, the NASA leader Raila Odinga has quoted Wafula Chebukati that he is the one who said that, you know, you can have they are technically prepared, but the prevailing political environment does not appear one that can cause him to speak with confidence that this will be a credible exercise. You were, according to unofficial information, though of course we formally know that you presented yourself for the position of chair of IEBC, you were one of the candidates who emerged at the top of that selection. Had you been in this
position now, what way forward would you prescribe?
And that's a really unfair situation you're presenting to me.
What would you do? You wanted the job. What would you do?
I know I wanted the job and I know what would I do, but I always keep away from talking about what would have been, what should have been. But speaking about the IEBC, I think the IEBC should have taken greater control of processes, election. IEBC should have taken greater control of the legal issues around elections. And without casting aspersions or otherwise, I think the management of the process has been a failing for Kenyans. With greater control, greater grasp of what the legal issues require there, we shouldn't even be where we are today. Why are we where we are today? They say there were legal issues that were not followed strictly. There was lack of strict compliance with the law by the IEBC, and that's really unfortunate. The IEBC is headed by a lawyer. We have a legal department. The law is with them. Why are we where we are? It's because they failed to strictly comply with the law, according to the Supreme Court decision. And I think if I was sitting there today, I would ensure I had control first of my commission and commissioners and be able to get consensus around issues. You shouldn't always go into a meeting wanting to vote on issues. And if they're legal issues, it's not a voting issue. It should be, this is the law. How do we comply? Not this is the law, but should we vote on whether we should do it or not? And I think there's a gap in the IEBC in terms of how they're managing themselves. I'm sorry to say this, Chebukati is my colleague, but I think, yes, there should have been more control, more firmness, and more strict compliance with the law. And if the management knew the law, and probably the failing is there were very few lawyers in the commission. He's the only lawyer in the commission. So maybe if he had one or two more lawyers to back him up, there would have been better performance from the IEBC.
You know, and my view is this, that we have an oversupply of lawyers in Kenya, and we have a big deficiency of application of common sense. Here we have a situation where IEBC is attacked with political interference from both sides of the political divide. And managing the institution is made very difficult. Then at the end of the interference, IEBC is accused then of not being ready to hold the election. It's a complete contradiction. If we were honest about it, it is the political interference that is making it very difficult for the IEBC to do its job. But
I don't think there's an oversupply of lawyers. Lawyers to citizens in Kenya, we are still undersupplied as a citizenry.
Well, the problem is that not two lawyers from the political divide can agree on a common interpretation of a law.
And that's how we are schooled, that I have to find a way of defending my side of the story. That's how we are schooled.
Yeah, I suppose, and there are the courts. Western envoys, held talks with the opposition today. They regretted the fact that NASA has pulled out of the race and acknowledged that IEBC has to proceed with this election. What do you think is the import or the weight of the comments from the Western Bloc? Raila Odinga has specifically said that they are causing more confusion and should keep off our politics. And it almost sounds similar to what we heard in the last election, when then TNA and URP were saying, leave us alone, leave us to our affairs. So what is the role of the international community, and does Kenya want this contribution or not, and is it significant?
Well, generally, international observers are a part of electoral processes, and they give credibility to the electoral process, because an electoral process is not just a national issue, it's a global issue. Everybody is watching, everybody wants to know, and we cannot isolate ourselves in Kenya and say we don't care what the rest of the world thinks about us. So international observers give us the credibility we need for international trade, for international relations, for international interactions. So we cannot shut our eye to what they say. and they play a valid role. They may not be here long enough as domestic observers. They may not be here long enough to understand the undercurrents of what the political situation, cultural situations, social situation, they may not be here long. They may not be able to cover the country, the entire country in the terms of whatever, but they have expertise, because what they bring in is election officials who have electoral expertise, and therefore their views are taken very, very seriously in the international arena. But in the case of Kenya, it's been a very, very interesting scenario. After the August 8th elections, we had a scenario where they came up, gave their views and said it was free and fair. And of course, there was a tussle about it. And then when the Supreme Court gave their decision, they came up again and said, yeah, we said this was free and fair, but we didn't say about X, Y, Z. So they kind of twisted the story and turned the tail. So in that scenario, their credibility kind of got a dent. And then now the other day, we had a scenario where the day before the EU came up and said, it's going to be nice. The next day, we have a commissioner defecting and saying, it's not going to be nice. So it leaves them with some murky waters, some egg on their face, but their value internationally and in electoral processes cannot be doubted.
Do you want to add to that, Sam? Your thoughts on the diplomatic community? Do you support their position?
Yeah, we support their position because all they're saying basically is that we should stick to the Constitution, we be faithful to the Constitution and follow the law. Unless you have got some firm guiding principles to help you navigate through these turbulent waters, then it becomes very difficult to be definitive in determining which is the correct direction. Okay.
I want us to talk about where legally and politically both stand, and I want us to start with President Kenyatta. I spoke to him yesterday, listened to his understanding of what the legitimacy issues are surrounding the election, and then we'll talk. You've talked about your main challenger who has since pulled out of the race, Raila Odinga, asking his supporters to stay away, and that may prescribe a situation where millions of Kenyans do not vote. How do you think this will affect the legitimacy of Thursday's election?
I don't believe it will affect the legitimacy in any way. I continue to, as he continues to call for people not to vote, which again is their democratic right, which again, even in a constituency, if you record 0 vote, yeah, so long as the returning officer says nobody participated, that is a Kenyan exercising the democratic right.
Rosalind, what do you think of that? Because the 0 vote issue is something that we hear from different, depending on which party a lawyer is supporting, then you will hear a different interpretation as to whether an election has actually been carried out in that area. Where do you think the president stands in that respect? And do you believe that the issue of legitimacy is strictly a political question and not a legal one as well?
Well, let's start with where the vote occurs and what the 0 vote is. As far as I read the law, it says elections must occur in every constituency. And that's what the law says. But again, the same law says if for reasons deemed credible to the EMB, so the election management body, they can suspend elections in a particular constituency for a certain period of time. Issues of security, inaccessibility, floods, wherever, you can actually suspend elections in a particular constituency so that they have a discretion to actually suspend. The issue is, did they arrange to have an election there? Were they organized to have an election, and therefore, for reasons beyond their control, they could not hold it? Then we will say that yes, elections were organized in 290 constituencies. And as far as I'm concerned, that is what the law says. The issue of a 0 vote is neither here nor there in the Constitution or in any of the electoral laws. What it says in Article 138 is that anybody who wins the presidential race must win at least half. Win in at least half of the counties. So as long as elections are held and someone actually emerges a winner in 24 counties, and the electoral body held elections in every county. And if they suspended elections in one county and the result of that election cannot affect the outcome, that means that if the voters in that county are, say, 100,000, and the margin we already have is 500,000 or 1 million, it will not affect the result. We can announce the result. But if it will affect the result, then we must withhold the result. So for me, I don't know about a zero vote. I don't see it anywhere in any law. But I know that elections must be held in every county, every of the 290 counties, and the winner must win in 24 counties. And the winning is getting majority of the votes cast.
Right.
Yeah.
Having said that, because you've also talked about, you know, if the commission was to suspend the election because of any eventuality, more than likely in this case it would be interference. And if that vote would then significantly could determine the outcome of the poll, do you envisage a scenario where we may be caught up not knowing the outcome of the presidential election for a period extended beyond that which the law prescribes for the announcement?
That would be really unfortunate, but just looking at the demographic of Kenya and the voter outcome, I do not think we'll land in that scenario.
Okay.
I do not think we'll land in that scenario.
Let's now talk about Raila Odinga, and I just want to stick with you, Roslyn, purely for the legal question. You will remember that once he emerged victorious from the Supreme Court decision, everyone was quick to say that he had legal and political capital and should spend it. As we stand right now, is it already spent?
I don't think it is spent, so to speak, because the Supreme Court decision is still out there. The finding of the court is still out there. Holding of an election within 60 days is still out there, and we can still hold an election within 60 days or otherwise. And my view is, even if an election was not held in 60 days, Kenyans should not feel that they're in a crisis. And if IEBC were to feel they cannot hold an election in 60 days, I think they owe Kenyans a duty to go to court and ask for extension of times or other periods. Even though the Constitution does not expressly provide for it, extension of time is a legal principle. And if you cannot reasonably do an act within the time provided, we always, as lawyers, ask for, give me more time. We always go for extension of time. So the IEBC needs to assess and evaluate itself and tell ourselves, if we cannot do it, can we ask for time? And there should be no crisis, because the president will still be president under Article 142. So I don't think the legal mileage is spent. The win is still out there, and the call for a new election is still out there. Now, the political side of it is where he says, I have withdrawn. I am not participating. And what I can say to that is, as Kenyans, we do not know the terms of his withdrawal. We do not even know whether he is actually withdrawn, because there are no complete documents towards the report. Leave the forms alone. I'm not sure there's even a letter.
Why would you say that? Do you have reason to believe that he did not present that? IEBC has not disputed the presentation of
They have not displayed any letter to us Kenyans to say, we have received a letter of withdrawal. All they said is he has not signed a form. Now, the issue of that form is very, very tricky, because it comes in at the first presidential election where he says he has to do it within 7 days. Again, lacunas in law occur, where he doesn't say, what about a fresh election? What about a rerun? Can you withdraw? And that question is still pending before court. That's one of the issues that should be decided by court within, I think that's something that's being decided tomorrow, that the judgment is coming up tomorrow, yes. So we got to wait for that and see what the court determines on that, whether he needed to have done a fresh election or not.
Sam, you headed KEPSA during the 2007 and 8 political crisis, and you know how difficult it was for the country to regain footing after things went wrong. What lessons did you carry with you from what happened then that we can apply now?
Now, we must remember that in 2007/2008, before we held the elections, the economy was growing at a very impressive rate of 7% per annum. Within 3 months of the crisis, the growth was scaled down to 1%. So it was a drop from 7 to 1%. Now, it is 10 years since that time, and we have not recovered to the growth level that that prevailed at that time. We are now up to 5%. In fact, it's dropped down to 4.5%, and that illustrates the impact of having a crisis and how long it takes to recover from a crisis. And that is why we are appealing to everybody in the country that we must not make the same mistake and go into a similar crisis, because if the economy crashes, this time round it will be a lot more difficult to pick up, because the conditions that we are now facing are less favorable than what we held, than what prevailed in 2007.
Right. As we wind up to both of you, regardless of how it goes Thursday, I think many people believe that what is really important are the days after a vote is cast, and of course the announcement of the president. That is where we have traditionally seen trouble, and so people are cautious about that. They are anxious about that. What do you believe, Roslyn, will be critical in the coming days?
Wow. Well, after a vote, there's a lot of tension. And the tension is not lost on us, because we have seen repeatedly violence coming up and emerging after election. And a lot of us are tense and scared. And a lot of us are worried. What if there's no election? I mean, we've done scenario mapping in the last 2 or 3 days. And they're the scenarios of a boycotted election or a no election altogether. And we are all asking ourselves as Kenyans and citizens, and peaceful ones too, that what happens if scenario of a boycotted election or a no election occurs? What is our safety? What's our assurance? And I think those are very, very scary situations. But for the IEBC, I think the issue is credible transmission of results, credible tallying of results, credible recording of all those events, so that everybody is in sync on the same page. Because I think when you look at the Supreme Court decision, the issues were around transmission of the results. Can we get it right? Because the Supreme Court has warned us, if we don't get it right, it will make the same decision. We can't afford it as Kenyans. We can't be in this scenario again. So transmissions of results, IEBC must knock it.
All right. What will be critical from your perspective, Sam, in coming days?
I think it's the country holding together. We'll have gone through an election, and it will be clear to everybody that we must not go back to the period of crisis and uncertainties. Our prayer is that the IEBC manages this situation effectively, and that the pitfalls that were experienced in the last election are effectively dealt with, so that the country can be satisfied that the election has been properly managed, and what is announced is truly what is a reflection of the will of the people, and that the only outstanding item will be the reaction of NASA, who will have boycotted, assuming they do go through with the boycott of the election. And even for them, my feeling is that they should be prevailed upon to A, accept the results, and 2, begin the process then of addressing their real issues. We as stakeholders are very supportive of making the necessary constitutional changes. And our feeling is that there should be no waste of time, and within 100 days after the announcement of the final results of the election, we should hold the constitutional conference, bringing all the stakeholders together in order to agree on the desired amendments to the Constitution. And those are carried through quickly, and appointments made, so that the NASA wing of our politics can then be accommodated within the governance structures of government.
All right. And that's our time. I want to thank you both very much for your views. Roslyn Odede, a legal consultant, and Sam Mwaura, the former CEO of KEPSA. We thank you for watching Monday Special tonight. Have a good evening. I'm Anne Kiguta. Bye-bye.